Family, allow me to talk about 40 acres and a mule.
A lot of folks have heard this phrase, right? 40 acres and a mule. As you say, a lot of people thought, okay, this just never happened. And your reporting is called 40 Acres and a Lie. What's the truth behind this program? What do people not know?
What people don't know is that it wasn't just a promise that was broken. People were received land titles. We found more than 1,250 people who got land titles, men and women. They picked out their plots of land, mostly on the plantations where they were enslaved. Actually, not everyone got 40 acres, which is another misconception. It was up to 40 acres. And then people were living there. They were planting their crops. They were selling them in Savannah. Some of them formed governments, elected a sheriff. They were living their lives, and they lived there for like up to a year and a half before they were kicked off.
How did they get kicked off the land that the government gave them?
Basically, because Lincoln was assassinated. I mean, they had promised this land. They gave land titles. The government said, this is yours. You deserve it. You're going to keep it. But Congress needed to make those titles permanent. They had a majority in Congress who were willing to do it. But Andrew Johnson, he was the vice president. He was a white supremacist. He sided with the planters who wanted their land back, and he vetoed every effort to make those land titles permanent.
You did a little more research to talk about the value of the land. This is an important part of your reporting here. One 4-acre lot that you identified in Jacksonville, Florida, based on a sale last year, that it would, today, 40 acres would be worth $2.5 million there. It's not just the land that was lost here in your reporting. Tell me about what else you found.
Yeah, well, just that generational wealth that wasn't passed on. You know, this 40 acres land was all the coast. It's like expensive coastal real estate. We found gated communities, golf courses, and restaurants, incredibly valuable lands. This is wealth that was not passed on, and that's kind of what we're trying to show is the impact. This is not a history lesson only. It's the impact on people who are alive today.
And I want to talk about it from my understanding. Because they told you that your 40 acres and a mule was lost, but they never told you it wasn't lost. Okay? It was stolen. And it wasn't in America. No. I think 40 acres and a mule, it was in Africa. Or it is in Africa.
And as I have been telling you all the time, I am very, very much prepared to receive the diaspora when they come back home to Africa.
The grandfather, Vito Kahengeri, the freedom fighter. So she has now the paperwork, and it's done.
Y'all see this? It's real. We have the agreement here for 40 acres of land, just for you. Give them a view of that mountain. Look at that. Kilimambogo. So you guys have access to this right now. This is going to be the first estate in all of East Africa where Kenyans and African Americans will be living side by side. I'm talking about plush luxury homes, affinity pool. What else we gonna have? We have a food court. I mean, exclusively right here in Kenya. So y'all see it. Y'all welcome home from the freedom fighter of Kenya. You're welcome home.
Kings and queens, welcome back to my YouTube commentary. Thank you so much for your support. This is your brother Kenyan Beast from Africa. Okay? And because today, family, we are exposing one of the biggest scam, one of the biggest secrets in history. The real 40 acres and a mule was never about land in America. It was always about Africa. The richest, most powerful land on earth that they made sure you'll never claim as a black American. On my video, I have 2 captions. One for English, another one for Swahili. Make sure you translate. You know, you look the English part, and if you wish to translate them to Swahili, I have translated it down there. Now, let's talk about this. Let's take it back to the roots. In 1865, just right after Civil War, General William Sherman issued Special Field Order number 15. Okay? The order promised newly freed black people, the formerly enslaved, 40 acres and a mule to start new lives, to rebuild their dignity, and have a place or a piece of land to call their own. Now, that promise represented justice, it represented reparations, it represented a debt America owed to black people for centuries of free labor and suffering. Okay? But do you know what happened? Just months later, President Andrew Johnson, the man who replaced Abraham Lincoln after his assassination, cancelled that order. He returned the land to the very white slaveholders who had waged war against America itself. So the promise of 40 acres and a mule died before it even lived. It was the first major betrayal of black freedom in America, and the betrayal shaped everything that followed. Okay? Now, here's the twist they will never teach you in school. Let me just tell you this. I know most of you know this. Some of you know, some of you don't know this. The twist is that 40 acres wasn't just about a small piece of farmland in Georgia or South Carolina. It was symbolic. It was the bare minimum of what was owed, because the real wealth stolen from black people wasn't just labor. Okay? It was the connection to the land, and the land was Africa. That land was Africa. Now, think about it for a second. The land where humanity began, the land with gold, the land with diamonds, the land with cobalt, the land with uranium, fertile soil, and sunlight all around the year. The land that couldn't feed the world, or the land that could feed the world for a very long time, yet it was called poor. Okay? That's not poverty, family. That is theft. Africa is the real 40 acres and a mule. And if I'm wrong, just tell me in the comment section, because I'm just saying my mind here. Okay? Because it is the land black people everywhere have been disconnected from, spiritually, politically, and economically. When white powers divided Africa in the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885, they weren't just stealing the land. They were stealing the black inheritance, okay? The same inheritance that 40 acres symbolized. Professor John Henry Clark once said, when they said 40 acres and a mule, they were really saying, we will give you enough, or just enough to survive, not enough to be independent. But Africa is independence. Africa is the land that gives you not just survival, but sovereignty. And that's why they don't want you to see it that way. There's a video someone say they are making it hard, or they have made it hard for so long for black Americans to travel to Africa. Because if black Americans, if black Caribbeans and Africans unite and realize that Africa is the true 40 acres, the entire global power structure collapses overnight. Boom, it's gone. Now, why did they hide this truth? Why hiding this truth? Because when slavery ended, they did not want millions of empowered black people controlling land or resources. They didn't want black wealth to grow, or the descendants of the enslaved to rebuild strong nations. So instead, they offered integration without liberation. Okay? They gave symbolic freedom, but no economic foundation. You hear me? So then they went back to Africa. They colonized Africa, divided it, and told Africans that their brothers and sisters in America were different. And at the same time, they were telling black Americans that Africa was primitive Africa was poor and unworthy of respect. This was psychological warfare because they were telling black Americans about Africa being poor and primitive. Why were they here? What were they doing here? Okay? It was a psychological warfare. It was a deliberate separation of family because they knew that if the descendants of the enslaved reconnected with the land of their ancestor, the system will never recover. And Dr. Amos Wilson said at its best, he said that the generation of the greatest threat to white supremacy is not a violent black man. It is a united, self-sufficient black nation. Okay? And that's what 40 acres and a mule represent. That's what 40 acres and a mule would have created if it have been honored. Okay? An independent black economic. But instead, they build walls of illusion. They replaced real land with illusion of opportunity, corporate jobs, debt, entertainment, distractions, and political promises that never come true. Let's be honest here. The idea of reparation in America has been debated for over a century. Okay? Every decade they create new commissions. Every decade they hold new studies. Every decade they make new excuses. But you know why they will never pay what black Americans owed or what they owed to black people? Is because your true reparation aren't in the bank accounts. No, they are not in their bank accounts. Your true reparations, they are buried in the soil of Africa. Every gold mine, every oil field, every part of plantation in Africa represent an unfulfilled promise and represent unfulfilled promise of 40 acres and a mule. The Western world's wealth, from London to New York, is the direct results of Africa plunder. Okay? And that's why they could afford to promise 40 acres in the first place, because they already owned continents full of stolen land and stolen resources. Okay? Dr. Cloud Anderson said that you can't be free if you don't own anything. Freedom without land is just a fantasy. So when you think about that promise, those 40 acres and that a mule, think beyond America. Okay? Think globally. Because the real inheritance of the black world is not a piece of property in Georgia. Okay? It's the entire continent that birthed humanity. And once you realize that, the conversation shifts. It's no longer when will they give us reparation. It becomes when will we reclaim what is ours. Okay? Now, they told you that America was built by hard work. No. You know, but they never tell whose hard work built America. They said Europe became powerful through innovation, but they never mentioned who invented or whose resources made it possible. Okay? Because when we talk about the promise of 40 acres and a mule, we are really talking about economic justice too. The right to own the fruits of our of your labor. Okay? But for centuries, black people built empires that were never get to own them. Europe's rise wasn't magic. It was Africa. It was the gold from Mali. It was the ivory from Congo, the diamond from South Africa, and the oil from Nigeria. The cocoa from Ghana, and, you know. It was the sweat of African labor and the genius of African minds that built Britain. Okay? Professor Walter Rodney said it clearly in his book of How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. He said, Europe was developed by Africa's wealth, while Africa was underdeveloped by Europe's theft. And that's right there is the truth they never wanted black Americans to connect. Because if you understand that Europe and America wealth came from Africa, you will realize something, that the reparations you deserve are not symbolic. They are geological, mineral, and ancestral. Because when enslaved Africans were shipped to America, their labor built the cotton empire. But when Europe colonized Africa, they didn't just take people. They took continents. They took gold from Ghana. They took copper from Zambia. They took uranium from Nigeria. They took rubber from Congo. And those resources built everything we now call the West. Okay? So when they denied you 40 acres and a mule, it wasn't because they didn't have the land or money. It was because they had already invested your inheritance into building their own empire. Imagine that if every black American who descendants from enslaved ancestors had received that 40 acres promise, they will collectively only millions of acres of land. And that means self-sustaining communities, self-sustaining of food and independence. But what if that land wasn't meant to be in America at all? What if that land was always supposed to be in Africa, the place where your ancestors were taken from? What if? Family, let's understand something. If the descendants of Africa ever reconnected to Africa, then game is over. Because Africa is not just the land. Africa, it is the key to sovereignty. It's where you don't need permission to breathe. It's where you don't need permission to build, to exist. And Malcolm X once said, you can't hate the roots of a tree and not hate the trees. You can't hate Africa and not hate yourself. Okay? And that's why they created mental distance between Africans and black Americans. Okay? They knew that if you ever looked at Africa in a different way, or have a desire to go back to Africa, there'll be a problem. You know? There'll be a problem. Now, Africa built Western civilization. That is the reality. Because when Britain industrialized, it used cotton from Africa. It used cotton from African slave in America. Okay? When France built its banks, it was using gold stolen from West Africa. When Belgium built its railroads, it was funded by rubber extracted from Congo. Okay? And when America became a superpower, it was through Africans' minerals, uraniums from Congo built the first atomic bomb. Cobalt powers modern smartphones, and oil from Africa fuels industries today. Okay? That means that every invention, every skyscraper, every modern city in the Western world that we are seeing at the top right now, it is built on top of the graves of labor of black Americans or black people, both in Africa and in America. And yet, they will tell you to forget about reparation. They say that was in the past. But family, how can it be the past when the same resources that enslaved your ancestors are still being stolen today? Do you remember Julius Nyerere? That was the president of Tanzania. He said this. They talk of aid to Africa, but who aid whom? Because Africa has been aiding the world for centuries. Okay? That quote of Julius Nyerere hits deep, because the lie of foreign aid and development loans is nothing but a disguise of modern day theft. Okay? They give Africa debt and take gold. They give Africa debt and take diamonds, taking oil and taking lithium. And they call it in investment. That's not investment. That is extractions. They call it partnership, but it is parasitism. Okay? And just like 1865 America, when black people were denied lands, today Africa is being denied ownership of its own resources. The same pattern repeats, only this time it is global. Okay? Now you might ask yourself, why don't they want you to claim Africa? It's because once you claim Africa mentally, spiritually, and economically, they lose control. Because right now, Africa's hold over 60% of the world's arable land. You know, the majority of global mineral and the youngest population of the planet is in Africa. So if Africans and the African diaspora unite to control that wealth, no Western company could compete. Okay? Now, I'll say this. When they tell you 40 acres and a mule, for me, I think that was a broken promise. Okay? But remember this, it was never meant to be a small piece of American soil. It was meant to be a return of your origin, the restoration of what was stolen on a continental scale. Okay? They can't repay what they owe because the debt is too big. So the only real payment is reclamation, taking back Africa, owning Africa, building Africa. Okay? So that's all I have to say about 40 acres and a mule. I think that promise was coming back to Africa, because how is it possible that white people, it's easy for them to come to Africa, but black people, it's not easy for them to come in Africa? Why is it like that? They know what they are preventing. 40 acres and a mule. That's my thinking. I don't know what you think. Tell me in the comment section. Until next episode, peace out.